Hello everybody, how are you? My name is Zola. Welcome to the Tea for Us. We're going to continue with chapter 2 of Healing, the Divine Art by Manly P. Hall. And this one, so chapter 2, it says, Priest, Prophet, and Healer, Miracles Under Ever Watchful Eyes. That's what it's like a summary of all the different little chapters, okay? Methods of the Specialists in Healing, Suffering as Punishment, Religious Beliefs and the Good Spirit, Masters of Hypnosis, The Indian Hope, The Messiah, Sitting Bull and the Miracles, Holy Men of Medicine, Healing by Sand Painting, Intellectual Birth by Flying Seeds, Conclusions of the Misinformed and Uninformed, and Guidance Through Prayer. The American Indian Medicine Man, that's what chapter 2 is about. So yeah, welcome. Manly P. Hall's a really interesting author. He's a 33rd degree Mason, and I think that his work, there's a lot of really dead-on and really interesting and thought-provoking material. And then once in a while I notice he kind of slips in something that frankly I think is just misleading and bullshit, but that's kind of how it is, though. They do like a 90% reveal, but they also sprinkle in lies or, red herrings might be a better way to put it, just to sort of throw people off the trail, because the occult is, after all, that which is not seen, right? And so sometimes there's things that they don't really want you to know. And so, yeah, I'm looking at this through the lens of, like, I've spent a lot of time investigating and looking into things and living a life with a lot of paranormal sort of experiences of my own and so on that I'm bringing to bear as I'm looking at this. All right, anyways, let's continue. Priest, Prophet, and Healer. The dictionary does not distinguish any difference in meaning between the terms witch doctor and medicine man, but assigns the first to the African voodoo worker and the second to the mystery priests of the American Indian tribes. In reality, the two represent distinct stages in the development of occult practices. The witch doctor came first, and only through a long and complicated process of evolution was he developed into the medicine man. To describe the Indian mystic as a medicine man is a singularly unfortunate choice of words. Semantically speaking, it causes, through association of ideas, an entirely erroneous conception of the whole structure of Indian metaphysics. With the term so fixed in the language that it's impossible now to change it, the need is to clarify as much as possible the natural confusion which results from the use of a familiar word in an entirely unfamiliar sense. We think of medicine as a medical or medicinal substance used in the treating of disease, and so a medicine man would be one who gives medicines, a physician. In this sense, however, it conveys no adequate conception of the American Indian holy man. The term was bestowed some 200 years ago by ignorant whites with definite intent to disparage, and later, medicine man came into still further disrepute when the term was assumed by itinerant quacks, unscrupulous white men who peddled various infallible elixirs and snakebite cures, supposedly genuine Indian remedies, but in actuality, utterly worthless concoctions. The dictionary recognizes that medicine is a synonym for magic, as applied to magical forms of healing. I have to say, I think that's really interesting because the dictionary nowadays doesn't say any such thing. But, this was written a long time ago, and a lot of things have changed over the decades. They're certainly doing quite a number to our language, making more and more words politically incorrect, so you can't use them. So this was from an earlier era when you could actually express yourself a little more freely. So let's continue. This meaning, while a little closer to function, is still misleading. Medicine man is not necessarily a healer, although healing might be one of his duties. The Indian has long applied the word medicine to any mysterious force which is beyond his understanding. When the American Army began to use repeating rifles against the Indians, these rapid-firing guns were described among the tribes as powerful medicine because the Sioux did not understand how the rifles could be loaded so rapidly. To the Indians, the medicine man was one who possessed supernatural powers as a prophet, seer, thaumaturgist, priest, physician, spiritist, spiritual healer. He might be only one of those, or he might combine several in the offices in his person. Primarily, he was a holy man. He was one who could speak with the spirits. He knew the ways of the gods. Frequently, he was also the tribal historian, for most of these priests possessed remarkable memories. Miracles under ever-watchful eyes. Modern skeptics inclined to discount the supernatural powers of the medicine man will do well to remember the conditions under which he worked. This prophet-priest lived his years and performed his miracles under the ever-watchful eyes of his fellow tribesmen. They knew his life from the beginning. They'd seen the mystic look come into his eyes. They'd known that he would choose the way of the seer. They remembered his first visions, and many times they'd seen him come back from his long vigils by the sacred fire. It would be difficult indeed for a man to be a deceiver from his infancy, especially when other watchful and sometimes jealous medicine men were ever present to try the spirits. The wonder worker was continually being called upon for various kinds of services, and if he failed in his enchantments, he did not continue long in popular respect. Nor could he remove to some other community if his failures caught up with him. For the medicine man to remain in good standing throughout a long and eventful life, his experiments had to be successful in considerable numbers. The more highly advanced Indian nations were far too intelligent to be easily deceived, and it was among these that the mystery priest came to his greatest power and developed to full flowering his supernatural arts. If the tribe needed rain, it was the medicine man's duty to find some way of producing it. Excuses might work for a time, but there nevertheless must be rain, or there would certainly be a new medicine man. If a prominent member of the tribe was taken sick, the medicine man was expected to discover and administer the necessary remedies. Too many failures in this line would also be disastrous, and this magician could not hide behind the declaration of an ailment being incurable, as the modern physician can and does. Nothing is impossible to one possessing supernatural powers. The desired cure is the only satisfactory end to the sick call. If the hunting was poor, the medicine man was consulted as to the exact location of the game, and when he'd made his pronouncement, the hunters started out. It's difficult to say what might have happened to the unhappy shaman had the animals not been there, and the hunters came back empty-handed, for the simple reason that all available accounts state that always the game was in the place that the priest had indicated. At various times, the tribe might be expecting trouble from another band of Indians, or later from the menacing white men. Then there would be a council, with the medicine man required, upon demand, to describe the enemy war party, state its whereabouts and its strength. Often the survival of the entire tribe would depend on the accuracy of the priest's mystical vision. He had to be correct in every detail, although the enemy might be 100 miles away. These were the daily tasks of the venerated seer, and the whole tribe stood judgment over the results. How many of our most highly trained scientists could qualify for the office of a medicine man in a tribe of American Plains Indians? Only results counted. Excuses were buried with the dead. Yeah. Oh, fell over dead suddenly. I wonder how that happened. Oh, it's a mystery. We don't know what happened. Methods of the specialists in healing. The more advanced medicine man who specialized in healing had, in addition to his magical powers, some knowledge of medicine and surgery. His physiotherapy included massage, sweat baths, sunbathing, counter irritation and local pressure with the hands and feet. And he also set broken bones, performed bloodletting, pulled teeth, and bandaged wounds. Dieting and fasting were practiced by most primitive peoples, and the medicine man prescribed this whenever indicated. Herbs have been used from the earliest times, and the experienced practitioners compounded herbal medicines and in some cases made use of animal and mineral substances. Medicine as science was highly developed among the Indians of Yucatan and the Central American areas. In the 2,000 years prior to the coming of Columbus, these people fitted false teeth and artificial limbs. They perfected a number of surgical instruments, and they performed the cesarean section long before the birth of Julius Caesar. Many important changes had to take place in the structure of ancient society before the dominion of the witch doctor was left behind and the medicine man became the keeper of his people. The most significant of these changes came gradually in the sphere of religion. The God concept emerged in order to put the spirit world, to put in order the spirit world of primitive man. The processes which brought this about can be studied among such peoples as the Egyptians. They had a large and complicated pantheon of divinities. Spirit guardians of powerful tribes gained prestige as these rose to temporal power. The conquered accepted the spirits believed in by their conquerors, and these victorious spirits gradually assumed the proportions of gods. There were gods of peace and war, gods of towns and villages, gods of earth and air and fire, gods of the living and of the dead. As the nomes or provinces increased in strength, their gods took on national influence, and in the end, the most successful deities became the superior gods, and the less fortunate assumed the states of tutelaries. With the belief in God came the transference of the tribal virtues to the person of this invisible being, the strong and loving protector of his children. Thus, God became good, because the ways of the tribe itself were always good. Man made his God in his own image, or in the image of that which he, man, desired to be. The tribal god was a great chieftain, a glorified extension in space of the physical chief. This spirit chieftain was the master of all the lesser spirits and ghosts, and they had to obey him. This belief that malignant agencies were no longer free to wander around afflicting at will put the world in order. For now, if an evil being sought to do harm, the good God would come to the aid of his people and punish the offending ghost. The bad spirits resisted this loss of power, of course, and tried in many ways to outwit the God. But this was not possible, because the God, who knew all things, could offset the evil purpose of the wicked spirits. It was the good God against the bad ghosts, and the struggle resulted in anthropomorphism, the doctrine of God and devil fighting for control over the world. Soon, good men in this world tried to help the God and lived according to his will, and after death their spirits could still help and also aid in protecting the tribe. Evil men who disobeyed the God continued after they died to plague the living, and so it became necessary for the God to punish them. Thus, good and evil came into being. White magic and black magic were divided, and the sorcerer came into ill repute. Suffering as punishment. Then came a culminating psychological realization that was to modify the whole course of human effort. This was the belief that suffering is punishment for disobeying the good God. That made it necessary. Yeah, I just have to interject that on one level, I think like this, this could be correct in the sense, if you're looking at it in terms of like a linear sort of a pathway, and there's no outside interference, that's happening, then I can see that there was probably some groups of people where it did kind of happen this way. However, he's not taking into account outside intervention that comes in and fucks with people. So I just wanted to throw that up there. Okay. So it's like he's telling you 3/4 of the story, but there's a little tiny bit there that's missing, and that is that there's actually outside interference that came in. But at any rate, he's kind of looking at this like, or explaining it at like, everything develops in a linear fashion and organically, which it does in some respects. That's if it's left alone to go its own way. But if other things are coming in and interfering, then you've got all these other influences that are happening as well. It's hard to put it into, I'm having a hard time trying to externalize and put that into words, but I can feel like there's something he's leaving out here. Okay. Anyways, yeah, there's more to the story than what he's telling you. That's what I'm feeling. Okay. Let's see, where was I here? This is the belief that suffering was punishment for disobeying the good God. Okay, that he's trying to say that this is something that we all came to the belief in, but what he's leaving out is that actually there was also interference in human affairs from an exterior source that sort of wanted them to believe this about themselves. That made it necessary for all who were afflicted by sorrow or sickness to make an atonement for their sins in the form of an offering to the God. And it just puts me in mind, of what he was saying in an earlier chapter there, where it was like, there are the 1%, of the bad ones that take advantage of their position as God, for example, and come in and they're like, yeah, you're sinners. You need to be punished for disobeying me. You have to do what I say or you're sinning. You're all sinners. You need to be saved. And so you're going to listen to me and do what I tell you. Okay. And they're masquerading as a real, true, benevolent deity. That's what I'm getting at. Or you might think of it as like the black magician, essentially, somebody that's taking full advantage of their position and their power in order to, enslave somebody mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And he's leaving that out. And he's trying to describe this as just this natural kind of organic process that's happening when actually human history and affairs is much more complicated than this because, and he knows this, they know this stuff, like the 33rd degree Masons know this, humanity was not alone on the planet, okay? And there was interference and he's leaving that out. So I just had to throw that out there, right? But at any rate, they throw out, like I said, they'll throw out like 90% truth and then they'll sprinkle in red herrings to try to, because there are some things that they would like to remain occulted, which just means hidden. So I just had to throw that out there. Continuing, this conviction did not work out so well for the reason that both the virtuous and the vice-ridden were subject to many of the same misfortunes. But the belief had been set up empirically, so the facts had to be altered to fit the preconceptions. When no fault could be found in the unfortunate sufferer that would explain his ailment, an appropriate vice was manufactured. Such beliefs as that the sins of the fathers were visited upon the sons, and, with Adam's fail, we sinned us all, are remembered examples of endeavors to explain the misfortunes of the virtuous man. Yeah, that's really interesting. With Adam's fail, we sinned, all of us, basically. Which I think is as nonsensical a concept as the idea that you could sacrifice one person that would somehow atone for everybody else's sins at the same time. So, in other words, they get saved and salvation through nothing that they did themselves, which is also goes against the laws of nature. And either way, it's a bit of a stretch. I just find that a little fallacious, and it's a little too simplistic, and no, I don't think it's accurate. At any rate, we'll continue. It was suspected, too, that evil spirits or ghosts might try to lure men away from the good God by various temptations, or, because of his personal goodness, might afflict him of spite. And this became a popular notion, and one that was to be complicated by the further involvement that the God himself might tempt his children to discover how true they were in their devotion. Saints wrestling with Satan and Job plagued with boils are illustrative of these viewpoints. From primitive man's floundering about, trying to fit the facts of his living into the structure of his beliefs, came some of the world's most unpleasant and unconvincing religious doctrines. We have to appreciate the spiritual problems of half-civilized mankind. Man obeyed his God and suffered. He disobeyed his God and suffered. He made offerings to his God and he suffered. Or, if he sold his soul to evil spirits, even then, he suffered. Regardless of everything, he suffered, he sickened, and he died. Is it to be wondered at that in the end he decided that God wanted him to be miserable and that there was something very wicked in being happy or comfortable? In this state of things, there was no rest for the mind, and the ancient pressed on miserably in search of some livable code. He had reached the inquiring stage by now, and the after-death condition of the soul began to intrigue his mind. And hey, don't get me wrong. I think this guy has a lot of really good information and knowledge. So, every now and again, though, I just gotta, I gotta interject. As late as Homer, 9th century BC, the Greeks believed that the departed dwelt forever in a gray shadowland, so that the poorest living mortal was more fortunate than the most illustrious dead. But it seemed obvious that God must live somewhere, and since he was invisible, his house must be invisible too. And so, the invisible hut of the good God marked the beginning of our conception of the other world. These were, and once again, this is like describing it as if it's like some kind of a linear thing. And what I'm trying to get at is that, for example, if, which I think actually is more than an if, but let's just, for the sake of argument here, if we were seated here, if we actually used to be much more highly evolved and something happened that dragged us down in terms of lowering dimensions, frequencies, we could have been very cognizant actually of the invisible world is what I'm trying to get at. So, he's looking at it from one way and explaining it in one way, but I'm just saying I think that there's other ways to look at it. I almost feel like in some instances it's like he's giving you the preschool grader version of things, but there's also like a college level or a university level of things, and so he's giving people like spoon feeding a little bit of pablum. That's how it feels to me. He's explaining one way how, this is how people arrived at the concept of the unseen worlds, and that there are beings that you can't see, but they still exist in these unseen worlds, kind of a thing. What we're really talking about, again, is vibration and frequency and extra dimensions, other dimensions. The universe is multi. It's a multiverse, and there are a lot of different dimensions, and he's explaining it like in one dimension. I think is what I'm trying to define this in a cognizant way. And don't get me wrong, I think what he's saying makes a lot of sense, and on some levels I think it's true. It's just that there's things that are being left out here. Like I said, outside intervention from extra-dimensional beings who, come in and masquerade and so on. Take advantage of humanity. We're not alone here on this planet. Like we didn't... Things didn't develop here organically. Let's put it that way. There was outside interference that came in as well. And so, I think that has to be part of the picture. But of course, they're not mentioning that, right? Like, for example, I spent over a decade practicing as a dream yogin, achieving lucidity in that state and maintaining that awareness from the time you pass out of the body till the time you return. And what I'm trying to get at is that reality is extremely multi-layered and many-dimensional. It is not one flat linear sort of thing, and there's a lot of different interpretations that one can put on a dream. For example, there's many different kinds of dreams. The most basic layer is kind of clerical, where you are collating and filing away the events of the day. But then there's what's called deep dreaming, and there's true dreaming, and there's strong dreaming, and you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper that you go, that's when you start encountering these extra dimensional beings. They have their own external reality. They're not part of the dream stuff that you can manipulate, like in the movie Inception, where you tell stuff to transform and it does. Yeah, there is some stuff in the dream states that does transform like that, but something that has its own external reality is not going to transform for you when you tell it to, because it's not part of that. It's real. It has its own physical being in its own way, in its own dimension. So, for example, if you're on a higher dimension, the beings that you meet there, if you're one of them, they're going to seem physical to each other, but to us, they would be like ghosts in the machine. They're a lighter and finer sort of a vibration. We're much heavier and denser. Anyways, yeah, there's much to be said. He's giving you a very sort of a flat, linear, and it's kind of allowing you to think, yeah, okay, this is how things happened, and that way you don't think about the deeper, the deep dreaming, for example. And I'm not discounting what he's saying, because on one level, everything he's saying here strikes me as true. It's just that you're only getting a very small sliver of information or a viewpoint. Yeah, it's like a chink of light in a shuttered window. You're getting a little bit of the picture, but you're getting a little bit of that illumination, but you're not getting the full light of day. There are many interpretations to the dream. It just depends on what level that you're looking at it from. And all of them can be correct at the same time. Again, it just depends on what level you're looking at it from. And I'm just trying to say that what he's doing in this chapter, some of this stuff that I'm reading here, it feels very much like it's first level kind of stuff. He's not giving you the bigger picture, okay? And there's this kind of, you're left to make the assumption, you're being kind of like manipulated or herded towards making the assumption for yourself, so that you think it's your own idea, is that this is the only way that things happened. And I'm trying to say that, you know what, there's a bigger perspective. Okay, so continuing on here, it says, heaven became the great escape for poor suffering mortals who had no peace in this world. But that puts us ahead of our story. For the medicine man came before theology had set itself into the doctrine of terrestrial misery and celestial bliss. Shh. What? Honey, I'm recording right now. You can't bother me right now. Just a sec, guys. Sorry about that interruption, but somebody wanted some attention, so I had to stop and give him some attention. Anyways, we'll continue here. Pick up again where I left off. Okay, that puts us ahead of our story. For the medicine man came before theology had set itself in the doctrine of terrestrial misery and celestial bliss. See, there it is again, that kind of intimation that this theology set itself in the doctrine of, it's like, oh, theology just, this whole these monotheistic religions just came about naturally and organically. And it's like, I don't think so. It was forced down people's throats, during the Dark Ages. So again, it's like it's kind of going, yeah, it just kind of set itself. It's like it's just something that just kind of like a stone rolling down the hill, this is just what happened. And it's like, well, no, there was some interference and yeah, intervention that happened. Okay, people were not left alone to develop organically. That's the problem. But anyway, I'm sorry if I go on banging on that subject, but it drives me nuts when I see that kind of manipulation, and it's very subtle, right? Like, you can be reading that and you don't catch it, you know? It pushes and nudges to make people sort of go one way and not even realize that they've just been manipulated. At any rate, continuing on, he belonged to that pagan order of things that held to the belief in joy and in living the full life. He was not one to moralize too deeply about the origins of disease. He did believe in the good God, and in his simple way he came much closer to a sufficient natural religion than those who were to deeply involve themselves in theological complications. Excuse me? Really? So they're calling the shamans simple? I don't think the shamans were simple. I think that they were, maybe the average village person was simple, you know, by comparison, like comparatively speaking. And I'm not putting them down by saying that. I'm just saying, you know, people exist on the spectrum. But, you know, the shamans were anything but simple. So what, baby? Are you hungry? Okay, just a sec, guys. I'll be right back. Yeah, or saying, you know, that, like, then that he came closer to a natural sort of belief system and didn't delve deeply into theological complications. That's basically what he's saying. Like, I think, if I'm reading this correctly and understanding it here, and I'm taking kind of exception to that, because actually I think that the shamans were on a pretty freaking high level. In terms of, you know, philosophical, theological, and, you know, moralizing deeply about the origins of diseases and probably a whole lot of other things as well, you know. And he's walking in many different realities and different levels of realities and dimensions and stuff. You know, he's able to leave the body and consciously go out into what I'm calling the dream time, but it's like the astral, the non-physical, you know, the non-local realities and so on. And I don't think that that's somebody that's simple, okay? So okay. Anyways, a lot of interruptions happening right now. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. He was never influenced by the conception that mankind was so wicked that it stood in constant need of salvation. Okay, I'll go along with that. Yeah, he definitely didn't feel like that whole idea of like mankind's in constant need of salvation. That's definitely like the Vatican. That's something else, you know. So I'll agree with that. And he was so respectful of the various religious beliefs of his neighbors that he could not be agitated with such questions as which of several faiths was the most inspired. What he knew was his faith was suitable to him. He assumed that others had the same sense of security. Religious beliefs and the good spirit. It's not possible here to discuss fully the various Indians' beliefs, for these were distributed among the many tribes and nations, but it may be said that most of the American Indians believed in one God or a great spirit who communicated with his children through the visions and dreams of the priests, that would be the shamans, right, and the spirit men, and sometimes through those of the laity. It's spelled Laity. I have to look that up. I don't know what that word, I haven't heard that word. I'll look it up later. Okay. After death, the soul might go to some happy land, good hunting grounds, or, I had to interject that, sorry, or, as in the words of Chief Seattle, when the last red man shall have perished from the earth and his memory among the white men shall have become a myth, these shores will swarm with the invisible dead of my tribe. Some Indians believed that the spirits of the departed remained among the living to serve and protect them in time of need. To the witch doctor, all spirits were evil, but the medicine man regarded most spirits as good. The medicine man brought forward many of the practices and beliefs of the witch doctor, but in every case with refinements and a marked improvement in the mental outlook. The mask, the rattle, and the drum remained, but all these implements were now parts of an integrated religious viewpoint. See, I have to kind of take exception just a little bit with that too, because he's calling it an integrated religious viewpoint, and I think that it was more of just a way of living. It was like a holistic spiritual way of living, and not necessarily like a, I don't know, like the Catholic Church, the Vatican. That was like a religious dogma. I don't know necessarily. I think that, but it seems to me that the shaman was much more inclined to look at people as individuals, and instead of giving them like a blanket sort of treatment, would look at each person individually and work out a solution for them individually. It's a totally different way of being. So, but at any rate, maybe I'm too sensitive. Anyway, we'll keep going. In some sections of the country, the medicine man still had to fight the wizards and the witches, but these adherents to black magic. God, I'm sorry, I'm interjecting here, but my goodness, okay. It's funny, there's this assumption that if you're a witch, that it's got to be black magic. That's what I'm reading there, and I'm kind of like, you know what? We're talking about stuff that, like he said himself, what was it? Came from Lemuria? I have to go back and look at that again. But at any rate, yeah. So if you have any kind of spiritual power and you're practicing anything that's occult, meaning hidden knowledge, and you're a female, you're a witch, and that must be black magic. Okay. All right. So that's not saying that there aren't black magicians and black witches, because there definitely are. There definitely are. But at any rate, okay, let's continue. I'll try not to interject for at least the next paragraph. But these adherents to black magic had lost caste and were ostracized by the respectable. Rites changed into rituals as the magical ceremonies were explained in terms of religious symbolism. Every song and dance took on a definite meaning, one understandable in the light of tribal tradition. The spiritual leader was now entering into the time of his leadership. As priest, he became the servant of his God, doing the will of the Great Spirit as revealed through an inner communion. Medicine man still sought his God in the old magical way, through dreams, visions, and trances. What was I just saying, talking about different kinds of dreaming? Yeah. Anyways, most great leaders of the Indian nations from Hiawatha to Geronimo gained their strength from visions. For on occasion, these might come to those who were not actually priests. The celebrated warrior Crazy Horse, great name, I love that name. Crazy Horse had a spirit experience in his younger days, and it's known that because of this, he believed that he could never be slain in battle, and he was not. His death was brought about by treachery under a flag of truce. Wow. During the Custer Wars, when one medicine man rode up to the American soldiers, they fired several volleys at him from a distance of less than 100 feet. But neither the Indian or his horse were touched. Ooh, when the magician returned to his own warriors, he shook a number of bullets from his war shirt. Oh yeah, but this is just some simple practitioner. I don't think so. This is some really advanced stuff here. Anyway, some tribes like the Ojibwe required long periods of special training for those who would be medicine priests, but it was more usual for the youth to select the career himself and then rise to fame and authority by virtue of his powers alone. In a few cases, the gifts of the spirit have been regarded as hereditary or prenatal. Men, too, have been called by their visions late in life, but usually the visions began in childhood, and by the time the boy was, by the time the boy was 12 or 13 years of age, it was the common knowledge of the tribe that he would be a priest. Sometimes he studied with older medicine men, but this was not necessary, as the visions taught him all the things that he should know. That's right, because he's connected. The finest book that has come to my attention on the subject of the mystical experiences of a medicine man is Black Elk Speaks, Life Story of a Holy Man of the Ogallala Sioux. The work is autobiographical and was given through an interpreter to John G. Nehart. Black Elk's great vision came to him when he was 9. The experience required 12 days. And during that entire time, his body was lying in a deep coma and his life was despaired of. He remembered that on his return from the spirit world, he saw his own body lying in the teepee. And as he came near to put his body on again, somebody was saying, "The boy's coming to, you'd better give him some water." Many years later, Black Elk was part of a troop of Indians taken to Europe on a theatrical venture. While on the other side of the big water, this priest made a spirit journey to visit his parents on their reservation. This mysterious trip required 3 days, and during that time, his body was in a deep trance and it was difficult to detect any breathing. These accounts might sound extravagant, but the Indian is a truthful man, especially in the matters of his religion. Mystical experiences described by the medicine men, when they will speak of such things, which is not often because of the ridicule with which such theories are received by most whites, are identical with those recorded among other nations which have developed elaborate occult traditions. The Indian mystics can see auras around the bodies of persons. Yeah, so can I. Can enter and leave their own bodies at will. So can I. Can travel long distances in their spirit shapes. Yep. Can converse with the dead. Yes. Help them find their way in the other world. Can meet the fathers and grandfathers of their tribes who have gone long before. Can see the future in clouds. Can describe words as flames of light coming from men's mouths. You know, that's really interesting because I remember attending a lecture that this fellow that I used to know was giving. And this guy was really, really good at oration, okay? Like, he was such a good communicator, and he could talk really well in front of large groups of people. He was just really good at that. And so he got up on the stage, and I'm sitting back in the audience watching. And when he took a big breath and opened his mouth to speak, when he took the big breath and opened his mouth to speak, this portal of blue light opened right at his throat area and shot out flame like a beam of light. So it's very interesting to see them describing that like that. I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. Words as flames of light coming from men's mouths. Interesting. Can feel themselves possessed by spirits and intelligences. And I don't believe I've ever been possessed. I don't think. And I certainly don't invite it. You know, I definitely don't try to invoke or say, oh yeah, you can use my body. No, it's my body. Nobody else gets to use it. But, you know, I do sometimes feel as if I'm being given information, and I don't know what, I've heard it described by New Agers as like downloads. I can't really describe it. It's like, yeah, sometimes the words and stuff will just come, you know, like you'll be writing and all of a sudden this information just comes and you have to write as fast as you can to get it all out. And then you can go back over it later and fix all the grammatical errors and spelling, and because I'm not a good typist, you know, so like I'm hammering away, pecking away, and yeah, a lot of it is when it's atrocious when you look back and it, you know, and you got to pick over it and fix all the errors of grammar and so on. Yeah. Anyway, that's interesting. I can understand the languages of animals and birds. I mean, I've definitely had some moments where I've definitely communicated and I've actually heard them speak back, but it's not something that happens all the time. So I don't think it's like a really strong point. I don't know. And I'm just finding this section quite interesting myself because, in fact, a shaman did take me under his wing for about 3.5 years and taught me a lot of stuff. So, yeah, I just think this is really an interesting chapter. It's important at this point to realize that most of the medicine men cannot speak any language, excuse me, but the tribal dialect of their people. It's not possible for them to have studied the metaphysical systems of China. So this guy, remember, is writing this book from another era, right? This is the early 1900s. Okay, cannot speak any language but the tribal dialect of their people. It's not possible for them to have studied the metaphysical systems of India, China, or Egypt. It's more than interesting, therefore, that they should describe their occult power in exactly the same way. Yes, indeed. Isn't that interesting? As do these other far separated races. If there are genuine occult phenomena anywhere in the world, they're present with the medicine men of the American Indians. Definitely. Masters of hypnosis. These priest-seers are also masters of hypnosis and mental suggestion. Modern scientists have acknowledged their excellency, and there's everything to indicate that in their knowledge of the suggestive arts, they're far ahead of the white man. In Medicine and Mankind, Eugene H. Poole, MD, president of the New York Academy of Medicine, describes a medicine sing he attended that was given for the benefit of a young girl suffering from an advanced case of TB. At the completion of the song, he writes, or sing, I said to the medicine man that I thought he worked much harder for his fee than I usually did. With a genial smile and a pat on my back, he responded that he did his patient a lot more good, too. Perhaps he was right. In the same book, Dr. Poole also pays tribute to the Indian knowledge of suggestive therapy. In these words, they've used hypnotism and suggestive treatment far more effectively than we have, and quackery is now no more prevalent among them than with us. They have so combined religion and medical practice that both are respected among them and both are respectable. The modern physician, of course, has far greater knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and chemistry than the Indian, but the red man excels him in all the metaphysical aspects of the healing arts. Furthermore, the medicine man, in most cases, has been given his healing formulas and his visions, which may mean a great deal in the final consideration of the care achieved. From any standpoint, the subject is strange and fascinating and will sometimes mean a great deal to the non-Indian doctor in his search for medical truths. It was my good fortune some years ago to see a fire-eating ceremony given by the California Indians. This was in no sense of the word a theatrical performance. It was put on by the tribe solely for religious purposes. A large heap of coals was prepared in advance, and an important medicine man came in from the desert to preside. After prayers and chanting that lasted well into the evening, the priest led his followers to the coals, and kicking the embers loose with his foot, he picked up a glowing coal with his hands and put it in his mouth. The others followed his lead, and soon a dozen or more were dancing around with the glow of the coals in their mouths showing weirdly through their cheeks in the darkness. The excitement spread to Indians who had gathered to see the ritual, and in a few minutes men, women, and children were holding the coals in their mouths. When the embers ceased to glow, the Indians spat them out and selected new pieces. Among the participating fire eaters were two men with badges that showed they were reservation police, but the ceremony was otherwise given in great secrecy because of the violent opposition of church missionaries. It's very interesting. This ceremony belongs to the same general type as the famous Fiji Island firewalking rites. It's funny that he says that, because that's what I was thinking he was gonna describe at first. In the Fiji ritual, a long trench is dug and fires are burned in it for several days to make ready a bed of coals, about 6 feet in width and from 20 to 30 feet in length. The heat is so great that it's impossible to approach the sides of the trench nearer than 10 feet. The firewalkers, after special preparation and sanctification, step into the fire pit and slowly walk the entire length. An occasional firewalker will carry in his hand a piece of raw meat. When he's finished the fiery journey, the meat is burned to a crisp, but neither the native nor his white body cloth is injured in any way. Examination of the bare feet of the firewalkers fails to show even the slightest sign of scorching or blistering, yet the heat in the pit may exceed 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty amazing, isn't it, right? These are the kinds of abilities that every one of us actually inherently possesses. We just don't realize it. And we've been taught to believe that this is like supernatural and only the oddity can do it. And, yeah. And it also immediately made me think, I think it was the Shaolin monks that I was thinking of that flashed into my head, and as they're doing some of their meditations and so on, I remember seeing a video of one of them. He was standing under a waterfall. We're talking like, cold water, okay? And he's under this thing praying, and he was there for quite some time, and he comes out and he's fine, like, yeah, so it's pretty amazing what the power of the mind can do. If the power of the mind can prevent a man from being destroyed by such heat, it's time that the subject is given consideration in a much more useful way than merely as a study of personality complexes. I would also say, I remember hearing a story about a native guy. I think they were out seal fishing. Yeah, I think they were out seal fishing, and they're somewhere up north. And one of them fell in, or something. The ice broke. But anyways, he fell in the water, and the other person with him was not able to pull him out, and so he told that person to go get help. And then he completely focused on him in his mind that he was warm or something. He was, at any rate, he was in the water for about an hour and a half before they were able to get back to him and pull him out. And he had mild hypothermia, but he was fine. And we're talking like freezing cold water, right? Like most people would only live like a minute or two, and this guy survived for an hour and a half in that. So, it is remarkable what the powers of the mind can do. Oh, I wanted to, and actually you can do more than just, influence like heat or cold. I had something that happened to me once when I was in, I'd spent like a month making jewelry, and then I took it to another city, and I spent 3 days pounding the pavement, and I made a whole bunch of appointments at all these different art galleries and whatever, right, to sell. And so then I had to go boom, 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 boom between 9 and 5 from place to place to place to place, and hit all these places and talk to the manager and so on and so on, okay? And one of the last places, I think it might have been the last place, basically I had to walk about, I forget, I'm going to say about 35 blocks or something, and I had to walk that, and I had about 10 or 15 minutes to do it in, and that's a lot of blocks. And I thought, what am I going to do here? Because I don't have money for a taxi. I have to walk. And so what I did was I held the image in my mind of like the clock at a certain time. When I walk through those doors, the clock will be at this time. And somehow I was able to make that walk, and I got there on time when really it should not have been possible, and yet somehow was able to make that happen. I don't know. Yeah, so it's really interesting, like the things that, like, people can do stuff that is really incredible and amazing. We certainly don't need brain chips or anything, transhumanistic there, to improve us and make us able to adapt and compete. I think that's ridiculous, and these things are kind of like brushed aside, right? And I don't think they should be brushed aside. It's very interesting how they are, though. So let's see, where did I leave off here? To dismiss such miracles by the statement that they are the result of mass hypnosis and that the audience only thinks that it sees the fire eating or the fire walking is ridiculous evasion of the observable and provable in the actual happenings. Yeah, well, there is like the official narrative in terms of like science today, right? and anything that's outside of that is considered like an anomaly. Except that the anomalies are really piling up and really starting to tell the real stories, to the point where perhaps we'll finally make a breakthrough. Let's see. Nor can these native rituals be compared with modern theatrical performances whose... Huh? Just a second. Let me read that again. What? Okay, let's go back for a second here. If the power of the mind can prevent a man from being destroyed by such heats, time that the subject was given consideration in a much more useful way than merely as a study of personality complexes, to dismiss such miracles by the statement that they are the result of mass hypnosis and that the audience only thinks that it sees the fire eating or the fire walking, is a ridiculous evasion of the observable and the provable in the actual happenings. Okay, then why does he say this? He says, nor can these native... Oh, okay, sorry. He's saying, nor can these native rituals be compared with modern theatrical performances whose wonders are accomplished with the aid of advanced chemical knowledge and devices. Okay, I think what he's saying here, I took it the wrong way at first, but what he's saying is that these native rituals can't even be compared to what modern theatrical performances are. Well, yeah, I mean, no, one is illusion and the other one's real. A remarkable medicine man on the Blackfoot Indian Reserve at Gletchen, Alberta, has been described by Chief Buffalo Child Longlands. The name of this mystic was Wolfhead. In 1928, he was still alive at the age of 83 years. Chief Longlands writes that Wolfhead has a unique power that is unexplainable even to a highly educated white man, is admitted by the present Blackfoot Indian agent George H. Gooderham, graduate of Toronto University, a white man who was born among the Indians and has no queer notions about what they do or cannot do. Wolfhead gained his medicine powers when struck by lightning at the age of 17, and the mystic faculties remained with him until he was converted to the Christian faith, and then the visions ceased entirely. And I'm going to say right there, and I know why, because this Christian faith is actually a mind control thing, and it's meant to separate you from that connection that people like these shamans and medicine men, that they actually had. He got severed from his connection, and that's why. His most remarkable exploit involves Archdeacon Timms, a missionary to the Indians who invented a method of writing the Blackfoot language. Wolfhead's spirit guide was called Boy Thunder. And one night, the spirit appeared and taught the medicine man to write the Archdeacon's characters. Next morning, the Indian priest amazed the entire tribe, and especially the Archdeacon, who tried in vain to teach his system by writing the new symbols perfectly, without having had any normal way of learning them. All right, well, we have reached the top of the hour. That went by pretty fast, hey? Maybe for you it did, but for me, it probably took double that time because I had to keep stopping and starting because I kept interjecting. Can't help it, guys. Hope it's not too annoying. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. This is the first half of the second chapter, and we're going to leave it here, and then we're going to come back in the next one, and we'll do the second part of the second chapter there. So yeah, until we see you back here, have a terrific weekend or day or wherever you are, evening, and look after yourselves. Be good to one another, and we will see you later. Talk to you soon.